Therefore, when they say the Palestinian people want the right to their land, what it really means is to drive the Jews out of this area and take over, in addition to the 19 or 20 independent Arab countries, all that have been created between the First and Second World War, create one more country instead of Israel.
The founding of Israel in 1948 was accompanied with waves of coups d'etats and revolutions in Syria, Egypt, and Iraq that placed a new generation of volatile Arab leaders in power. These leaders sought greater Arab unity and independence, and wanted to end all Western presence in the Middle East. Israel grew increasingly threatened by the prospect of powerful Arab neighbors. To ensure its own security, Israel made repeated raids into the Gaza Strip and threatened its neighbors with military action. The Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser was infuriated. Convinced that a strong, armed Egypt was the only solution, Nasser turned to the Soviet Union in the infamous Cotton for Guns deal. When Nasser nationalized the British-controlled Suez Canal in 1956, a tripartite alliance of Israel, England, and France invaded Egypt and captured the Sinai Peninsula in 4 days. U.S. President Eisenhower, outraged at being excluded from the invasion, forced an immediate withdrawal. The Suez War thus marked the end of European colonization and placed the United States as the undisputed foreign leader in the Middle East. The threat of Soviet intervention during the war, reminiscent of the later Cuban Missile Crisis, prompted the U.S. to issue the Eisenhower Doctrine, aimed at containing the communist presence in the region.
Many, if not all, of the nations of the Middle East are aware of the danger that stems from international communism and welcome closer cooperation with the United States to realize for themselves the United Nations goals of independence, economic well-being, and spiritual growth.
The Suez War was largely seen as a dress rehearsal for the Six-Day War. In the period of stalemate following the crisis of the 1950s, Israel and its Arab neighbors engaged in repeated ceasefire violations and military threats. The danger of war remained a hot potato in the Cold War, as nearly every violation of peace seemed to draw the United States and the Soviet Union closer and closer to nuclear war. The conflict broke out of stagnation in 1967, when Soviet and Syrian sources warned Nasser that Israel was on the verge of attacking Syria. The Egyptian president, already suspicious of Israel and convinced that military action remained the only viable option, reacted heavily. Nasser sent the Egyptian army into the Sinai, ordered the removal of United Nations peacekeeping forces, and once again closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping. Israel interpreted these actions as acts of war, and with approval from the United States, launched a preemptive strike against neighbors Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Within only 6 days, Israel destroyed over 90% of the Arab air forces, and attained control over vast territory in the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. The Six-Day War of 1967 was largely a reaction to the decade of crisis which preceded it. Historians concede that if the Suez War had seen a different resolution that provided peace and security, the Six-Day War would never have taken place. The Suez Crisis, dovetailed with foreign intervention and incapable leaders who refused to compromise, led to a war that forever transformed the Middle East. The Six-Day War is rightfully seen as a revolution that capsized the nature of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and in creating seemingly endless confrontation and warfare, opened new doors to bringing about peace in a region lacking cooperation and stability. The direct consequences of the Six-Day War devastated the lives of Arabs and Israelis alike. Over 300,000 Palestinians fled Israel in the aftermath of the war, and thousands of Jews were expelled from Arabic and communist countries. A daunting refugee crisis emerged as Palestinians were forced to live in camps on the perimeter of the Israeli border. Israel, in turn, established settlements in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights. Today, over 200 settlements, populated by nearly 600,000 Israelis, dot the landscape of the occupied territories. The Six-Day War gave birth to large-scale terrorism from both sides of the conflict, as terrorist groups such as Fatah and Black September gained prominence. Israel, in return, has relied on its armed forces to engage in state-sponsored terrorism. Since 1967, both the Israelis and the Palestinians have been guilty of human rights violations, which have continued to this day.
The other thing, of course, is that the Palestinians have counted on terrorism to keep their issue alive, and it's worked, actually.
Most important of the effects of the Six-Day War is the way it revolutionized and made possible peace in the Middle East. The Arab states initially established the three no's, calling for no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, and no negotiation with Israel. The United Nations, however, issued Resolution 242, which established the Land for Peace formula.
Every peacemaking effort ever since 1967 has been based upon a formula of land for peace. And that land, of course, is the occupied territories, whether it was the Sinai, the Golan Heights, or whatever. The idea, of course, was that if Egypt or Syria recognized the State of Israel, declared belligerence against the State of Israel, then that the Israelis would in turn return the land that they took.
Perhaps the greatest breakthrough in peace came with the 1978 Camp David Accords.
It provides for the full exercise of Egyptian sovereignty over the Sinai. It calls for the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Sinai. And after an interim withdrawal, which will be accomplished very quickly, the establishment of normal, peaceful relations between the two countries, including diplomatic relations.
Further attempts at peace occurred in 1993 with the Oslo Accords, when Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization met face-to-face to negotiate for the first time in the decades-long crisis. However, the Camp David Accords and the Oslo Accords only made small steps towards truly resolving the greater conflict.
Instead, the real issue why there isn't peace is because that accord does not address the central issue, which is the Palestinians.
Since Oslo, however, slow but promising progress has been made. In 2005, the Palestinians attained sovereignty over the Gaza Strip. The Middle East still remains a volatile region, as regime changes from the Arab Spring and fear of war between Israel and nuclear Iran threaten to destroy any progress made since the Camp David Accords.
Before 1967, the issue was in stalemate. You had the Arab states not recognizing Israel. You had Israel, basically unable to, taking all sorts of actions against the Arab states, et cetera, unable to get that recognition from the Arab states. Then you had a bargaining situation that was established in 1967. Nobody saw that was going to happen. Okay, you had, for example, the Camp David Accord was signed after Anwar Sadat said he would go to the ends of the earth for peace. He would go to Jerusalem itself. So he went to Jerusalem. Nobody foresaw that happening either. So the moral of the story is that it's not probable, but it is entirely possible that under changing conditions, the equation will shift.
The journey of the Israeli and the Palestinian people since 1948 has been marked with violence, destruction, and instability, which has threatened all of Western civilization. Years of stalemate and foreign intervention erupted in the Six-Day War, which was certainly a reaction to the crisis of the 1950s. More importantly, however, the Six-Day War transformed the arena for peace and stability in the Middle East. By completely altering the relationship between Israel and its Arab neighbors, the Six-Day War ironically paved the path for open peace talks and agreements to create a safer Middle East. The Arab-Israeli conflict may yet remain unresolved, but every step, every inch towards bringing peace and cooperation in a region so desperately lacking stability is undoubtedly the result of the revolution that is the Six-Day War.